The relentless downpour transformed the city streets into rivers of shimmering reflections, streetlights wavering like underwater beacons, guiding weary souls home. Among them was Samantha Carter, her shoulders hunched against the weight of both. The rain and the endless responsibilities that defined her existence. Her weathered umbrella, patched with duct tape in 3 places, fought valiantly against the storm as she hurried toward the diner where her second shift awaited. The neon sign of Rosie's Diner flickered in the distance, a lighthouse of promise. In a sea of uncertainty, Samantha's mind drifted to her daughter Lily, now safely tucked away at Mrs. Peterson's apartment down the hall. The elderly neighbor watched Lily most evenings, a blessing Samantha couldn't afford to pay for properly, though she tried with homemade meals and weekend repairs around the apartment. Just 6 more hours, she whispered to herself, the mantra that carried her through countless nights like this one. 6 more hours of serving coffee, wiping tables, and wearing a smile that hid the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. 6 more hours until she could crawl into bed, stealing a few precious moments beside her sleeping daughter before dawn called her to her morning job at the grocery store. As she approached the diner's warm glow, a movement in the shadows caught her eye. There, huddled against the brick wall beneath the narrow awning, was a small figure trembling with each gust of wind. Samantha slowed her pace, caution tempering her curiosity. The city had taught her to keep walking, to mind her own struggles. But something made her stop. A boy, no more than 10 years old, sat with his knees pulled tight against his chest. His soaked clothes clung to his thin frame, dark hair plastered against his forehead, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. A backpack, its fabric darkened by rain, rested protectively under his arm. "Hey there," Samantha called, keeping her distance. "You okay?" The boy's eyes darted up, then away, offering no response beyond pulling himself tighter into the walls. "Meager shelter. You shouldn't be out in this weather," she continued, taking a cautious step closer. "Where are your parents?" Thunder rumbled overhead, emphasizing the silence that followed her question. The boy, Jake, she would later learn, simply shook his head, a gesture containing volumes of unspoken story. Samantha checked her watch. Her shift started in 10 minutes. If she was late again, Doreen might not be as forgiving as last time. She had Lily to think about, bills piling higher than the leaning tower of late notices on her kitchen counter. "I'm not going back," the boy finally spoke, his voice surprisingly steady despite his shivering. "You can call whoever you want, but I won't go back there." The rain intensified, drumming against her umbrella in an urgent rhythm that matched her quickening heartbeat. She should walk away. She should call someone. The police, social services, someone equipped to handle this situation properly. Instead, Samantha found herself doing what reason told her not to. She extended her umbrella, creating a small sanctuary from the storm. "I'm Samantha," she said, crouching down to meet his eyes. "I work at this diner. Are you hungry?" A flicker of interest crossed his face, quickly masked by suspicion. "I don't have any money." "That's okay. Neither do I, most of the time," she smiled, the honesty of her words reflected in the worn edges of her coat and the careful way she'd mended her shoes. "But I know the cook, and he always makes too much soup on rainy nights." Inside the diner, Samantha made a difficult call to Doreen, fabricating a story about Lily's sudden fever. The lie tasted bitter, but as she watched Jake devour a bowl of chicken soup, color gradually returning to his face, she knew she couldn't leave him to the mercy of the storm. Later that night, as thunder continued its distant conversation with the city, Samantha led Jake up the creaking stairs to her apartment. The decision weighed on her with every step. Another mouth to feed, another risk to take, another complication in a life already stretched to breaking. Yet when Lily's sleepy eyes widened at the sight of their unexpected guest, her whispered, "Is he staying with us, Mommy?" carried no judgment, only the pure acceptance that children sometimes offer more readily than adults. "Just for tonight," Samantha answered, though something in her heart whispered that the ripples from this rain-soaked encounter would stretch far beyond the breaking dawn. Morning light filtered through tattered curtains, painting delicate patterns across the small apartment's worn floorboards. Samantha stood in the kitchen alcove, silently stirring a pot of oatmeal while watching the two children at her tiny dining table. Lily sat cross-legged on her chair, animatedly showing Jake her prized collection of seashells gathered during their one-day trip to the coast last summer, a rare splurge that had meant eating ramen for 2 weeks afterward. "This one sounds like the ocean," Lily whispered, pressing a spiral shell to Jake's ear with the solemnity of sharing a precious secret. Jake's smile, hesitant and unpracticed, transformed his face, washing away the guarded expression he'd worn since Samantha found him huddled against the diner wall. For a moment, he looked exactly what he was, a child, not the street-hardened survivor who had flinched when she reached to brush his hair from his eyes last night. "I've never been to the ocean," he admitted, handling the shell as if it were made of glass. "Is it really as big as they say?" "It goes forever and ever." Lily stretched her arms wide, nearly toppling from her chair. "Mommy says it's like the sky fell down and turned blue and wavy." Samantha's throat tightened. The simple poetry of her daughter's words she'd forgotten she'd even said, reminded her of times when dreaming had been easier, before duel, jobs and mounting bills had consumed her imagination. Breakfast passed in a delicate dance of avoided questions. Jake ate ravenously but neatly, clearly accustomed to making food last. When Samantha finally settled across from him, her coffee mug warming her perpetually cold hands, she knew she couldn't postpone the inevitable conversation any longer. "Jake," she began softly, "we need to talk about what happens next. Is there someone I can call for you? Family? Anyone who's missing you right now?" The momentary lightness vanished from his face, replaced by a carefully blank expression that no child should have mastered. "There's nobody," he said, eyes fixed on the table's scratched surface. "My mom died last year, cancer. After that, it was just me and my dad, but..." His voice trailed off, fingers unconsciously tracing a faded bruise near his wrist that Samantha had noticed but not mentioned the night before. "Dad started drinking more, then he just left 3 weeks ago, said he was going to the store." Jake's shrug carried the weight of abandonment, too heavy for his narrow shoulders. "The landlord locked the apartment when we couldn't pay. I've been staying different places since then." Lily, sensing the heaviness in the air, slipped her small hand into Jake's. "You can share my room," she offered, with the uncomplicated generosity of childhood. I have a fuzzy blanket that's super warm. Samantha's mind raced through her options, each bleaker than the last. The responsible thing would be to call social services. Jake needed stability, proper care, things she was barely providing for her own daughter. Her budget, stretched tissue thin already, couldn't accommodate another child. The apartment's single bedroom where Lily slept was barely large enough for one, let alone two. The sofa where Samantha herself slept wasn't meant for permanent use, but those eyes, too old for his face, carrying shadows no child should know, held hers, silently pleading even as his expression remained carefully neutral, prepared for rejection. I should call someone who can help find you a proper place to stay, she said, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. They'll just put me in a group home, Jake replied with the certainty of someone who'd navigated the system before. Or foster care. The last foster dad took my mum's watch, the only thing I had left of her. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking seconds of silence as Samantha stood at a crossroads. Outside, the world continued. Traffic humming, neighbors arguing, the relentless machinery of life demanding she make the practical choice, not the compassionate one. Maybe, she began, surprising herself with the word, maybe you could stay here just until we figure something better out. The hope that flickered across Jake's face was almost immediately concealed, as if he'd learned that showing desire for something was the surest way to lose it. I don't need much room, he offered quickly, and I can help. I'm good at fixing things. I fixed the sink at our old place when it leaked. Lily clapped her hands in delight, seashells momentarily. Forgotten, Jake's staying. He can be my big brother. Temporary, Samantha emphasized, even as something deeper whispered that life's most permanent changes often begin with words like just for now and temporary. We'll take it one day at a time. Later, as she washed breakfast dishes and watched Jake and Lily construct an elaborate fort from cushions and blankets, Samantha calculated and recalculated her budget, trying to find dollars that simply weren't there, another mouth to feed, another set of needs to meet. The practical voice in her head listed all the reasons this was impossible. But the laughter, Lily's bright and uninhibited, Jake's rusty as if remembering how, filled the apartment with something that had been missing for too long, something no budget could account for, no calculation could measure. One day at a time, she whispered to herself, the phrase becoming both prayer and promise as she watched two children who, against all odds, might just help each other heal. The apartment building's communal washing machine hummed in the background as Samantha sorted through a basket of laundry, carefully separating the few items that could still be salvaged from those beyond repair. A small tear in Lily's favorite sweater caught her attention and she sighed, adding it to the growing mending pile. I can fix that, a voice offered from the doorway. Samantha looked up to find Jake standing there, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his borrowed t-shirt, one of the few items she'd managed to pick up at the thrift store last week. In the 2 weeks since he'd arrived, his face had filled out slightly, the hollows beneath his cheekbones softening, though his eyes still carried that watchful alertness that broke her heart. You know how to sew? She asked, unable to hide her surprise. Jake nodded, stepping forward to examine the sweater. Mom taught me. She used to alter clothes for extra money. His fingers traced the tear with unexpected gentleness. This is easy. Just needs a few stitches. That evening, as moonlight spilled across the cramped living room, Samantha watched in wonder as Jake's nimble fingers worked a needle and thread, his concentration absolute. Beside him, Lily dozed against his shoulder, her small body curled trustingly against his side. The scene before her, tender, domestic, impossibly precious, caught in Samantha's throat. These small moments had multiplied in recent days. Jake teaching Lily to fold paper cranes from old newspapers, the children working together to repair, the wobbly kitchen table, the trio sharing a single ice cream cone at the park, laughing as it melted faster than they could eat it. Moments where poverty receded, if only briefly, revealing the wealth of connection blooming between them. But reality always returned with the morning light. Bills accumulated on the counter, each envelope bearing increasingly urgent red stamps. The refrigerator grew emptier as Samantha stretched each meal further, often claiming she'd eaten earlier, when in truth she'd sacrificed her portion to ensure the children had enough. Mrs. Geller from 3B was asking questions again, Jake mentioned. Quietly one evening as he helped wash dishes, his voice carefully neutral, though his shoulders had tensed. About where I came from, if I was your relative. Samantha's hands stilled in the soapy water. Mrs. Geller, the building's self-appointed guardian of propriety, had cornered her in the hallway twice already, thinly veiled accusations disguised as concern. Let her ask, Samantha replied with more confidence than she felt. We're not doing anything wrong, but the whispers multiplied. At the grocery store where she worked mornings, customers would fall silent when she approached, conversations resuming only after she'd moved to another aisle. At the diner, Doreen had pulled her aside, voice lowered. People are talking, Sam. Taking in some street kid without papers or permission. There's words for that, and none of them good. The knock, when it finally came, still caught her unprepared. A Tuesday afternoon, her rare day off. A woman in a sensible coat, clipboard in hand, official identification displayed. Child Protective Services. Ms. Carter, I'm Diane Wilkins from Family Services. We've received concerns about an unregistered minor in your care. The small apartment suddenly felt even smaller as the social worker's eyes catalogued every detail. The sofa cushions neatly arranged to form Jake's makeshift bed, the carefully mended curtains, the dining table where 3 mismatched plates sat waiting for the simple pasta dinner Samantha had prepared. I understand you've taken in a boy who isn't your legal dependent, Ms. Wilkins continued, pen poised above her clipboard. While your intentions may be good, harboring a minor without legal guardianship is a serious matter. The questions came in a steady stream. Where was Jake from? Had she contacted authorities? What was her financial situation? Could she provide adequate care for 2 children when her income barely covered one? Each query struck with precision, exposing the fragility of the life they'd constructed. He had nowhere else to go, Samantha finally said, voice barely above a whisper. What was I supposed to do? Leave him in the rain? Ms. Wilkins's expression softened slightly, but her words remained firm. There are proper channels, Ms. Carter, systems in place. While I appreciate your compassion, we need to consider what's best for both children, including your daughter. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Was Samantha's decision to help Jake putting Lily's welfare at risk when the social worker finally left, promising to return for a more thorough assessment and to discuss options for Jake? Samantha sank onto the sofa, trembling. The small apartment, which had somehow expanded to embrace 3 hearts, now felt precarious. A house of cards waiting for the slightest breath to collapse it. Later that evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, rain like the night she'd found him, Jake approached, hesitation in every step. "I heard her," he admitted. "The social worker. I was listening outside the door." His hands twisted, the dish towel he'd been using to dry the dinner plates. "Maybe I should leave before they come back, before you get in trouble because of me." "No," Lily interrupted, appearing from her bedroom with fierce determination despite her flower-patterned pajamas. "You can't go. You're family now." The word hung in the air between them. Family, at once so simple and so profound. Tears welled in Samantha's eyes as she reached out, drawing both children into her embrace. "We'll figure this out," she promised, though the path forward remained obscured. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." That night, long after the children had fallen asleep, Lily in her small bedroom, Jake on his sofa cushions, Samantha sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, bills, work schedules, legal information she'd printed at the library about guardianship and fostering. The numbers didn't add up. The hurdles seemed insurmountable. The world aligned against them. Yet somehow, as she gazed at Jake's careful stitches in Lily's mended sweater, hanging now on the drying rack, so small a thing, such a profound act of care, Samantha found herself believing in possibilities beyond calculation. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by evidence of both their poverty and their abundance, she made a silent vow. This fragile, improbable family they'd created would not be easily broken. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the apartment windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Samantha hunched over a stack of forms at the kitchen table, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. The fostering application before her seemed endless. Intrusive questions about income, living arrangements, personal history, and psychological fitness, each one a potential roadblock to keeping their fragile family intact. Ms. Wilkins had been unexpectedly helpful during her follow-up visit, impressed by Jake's obvious attachment to both Samantha and Lily. "There's something special here," she had admitted, watching the children work together on Lily's art project. "But the system has requirements that can't be overlooked, no matter how good the intentions." The requirements felt like mountains. Stable income significantly above what Samantha currently earned. Proper bedroom space for each child, savings for emergencies, and legal fees that seemed astronomical to someone who counted pennies for bus fare. "We need more than miracles," Samantha whispered to herself, rubbing her temples. "We need money." The solution came at a price she'd never imagined paying. In her bedroom drawer, wrapped in velvet, lay her father's pocket watch, the only item of value she possessed. He'd carried it through decades of factory work, its golden case worn smooth where his thumb had rubbed across it countless times. "Time is the only thing worth counting," he told her once. "Not money, not troubles, just moments." Samantha's hands trembled as she removed it from its resting place. The pawn shop owner examined it through a jeweler's loupe, his expression carefully neutral as he named a figure that would cover the initial legal consultation and filing fees. Not enough for the entire process, but a start. "It's been in my family for generations," she said, her voice catching. The man looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. The look of someone who regularly witnessed people parting with treasured possessions out of necessity rather than choice. "Are you sure?" Samantha thought of Jake that morning, hunched over the kitchen table with Lily, patiently explaining fractions using apple slices. His face animated with the joy of teaching, of being needed, of belonging. The memory strengthened. Her resolve. "Yes," she said firmly, "I'm sure." That evening, Doreen at the diner listened sympathetically as Samantha explained her situation, requesting as many extra shifts as possible. "Honey, you're already working yourself to the bone," Doreen cautioned, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "There are easier ways." "I'm not looking for easier," Samantha interrupted, determination steadying her voice. "Just possible." The following weeks blurred into an exhausting routine. Mornings at the grocery store, afternoons helping at the local community center in exchange for after-school care for both children, evenings and weekends at the diner. Sleep became a luxury, snatched in brief intervals between responsibilities. Samantha learned to function on coffee and determination, her body moving through motions while her mind constantly calculated. Hours worked, dollars earned, forms completed, hurdles remaining. Yet within this grinding routine, unexpected moments of grace appeared. The elderly couple who owned the grocery store began sending home surplus food that Samantha suspected wasn't surplus at all. Doreen regularly mixed up orders at the diner, resulting in extra meals to take home. Mrs. Peterson, their elderly neighbor, started insisting that the children spend afternoons in her apartment, where they mysteriously returned well-fed and carrying leftovers. Most surprising was Jake himself. As if sensing the weight Samantha carried, he stepped into roles no child should need to assume, becoming Lily's protector and companion, taking on household tasks without being asked, stretching their meager resources with ingenious solutions. One evening, Samantha returned home to find dinner waiting. A simple but nourishing stew Jake had prepared using skills he'd never mentioned possessing. "Mom taught me," he explained with that same quiet pride that appeared whenever he shared pieces of his past. "She said everyone should know how to make something from nothing." More remarkable was his transformation at school. Initially withdrawn and defensive, Jake had gradually emerged as a student of extraordinary potential. His science teacher, Mr. Ramirez, had requested a meeting with Samantha, not to discuss problems as she'd feared, but possibilities. "Jake has a natural aptitude for scientific concepts that I rarely encounter," Mr. Ramirez explained, spreading out a collection of Jake's projects. "This experiment design, most adults couldn't conceptualize these variables so clearly, and his understanding of physics principles is intuitive." He hesitated, then continued carefully. "There's a science competition coming up with scholarship prizes. Jake could be a strong contender, but he would need materials, support." "He'll have it," Samantha promised, though she had no idea how to fulfill that pledge. Later that night, after helping Jake refine his competition proposal, a remarkably sophisticated project involving renewable energy concepts, Samantha sat alone at the kitchen table, tallying figures that refused to balance. The fostering process moved forward in agonizing increments, each step requiring more documentation, more meetings, more resources they didn't have. The watch money had been depleted. Her multiple jobs barely covered essentials. The legal aid, attorney had been kind but clear. The home inspection and background investigation phases have additional fees that can't be waived. Samantha opened her wallet, counting the meager bills inside. Not enough, never enough. From her bedroom, she could hear the soft sounds of Lily's breathing and Jake's occasional murmur as he talked in his sleep. A habit they'd discovered, endearing in its vulnerability. The contrast between the precious lives under her care and the cold numbers before her seemed unbridgeable. As dawn approached, Samantha made one more call to her estranged aunt in another state, the last family. Connection she'd avoided for years due to complicated history. The conversation was difficult. Pride swallowed with each word as she explained their situation, asked for help she'd never wanted to request. "I wouldn't ask if there was any other way," Samantha said, voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking. "The children. This isn't for me. It's for him, for them both." When she finally hung up, a small loan secured, but at emotional cost she couldn't yet calculate, Samantha caught sight of herself in the window's reflection. Exhaustion had carved new lines around her eyes. Worry had thinned her face. But something else shone there too, a fierce, unwavering light that hadn't been present before Jake arrived. Outside, the first golden rays of sunrise touched the city skyline. Another day of struggle awaited, but as Samantha watched Jake emerge from sleep to immediately check on Lily, a gesture so unconsciously protective it caught her breath, she knew with bone-deep certainty that every sacrifice, every exhausting hour, every precious thing relinquished was not just necessary but sacred. Some prices, after all, were worth paying. The autumn leaves danced and swirled outside the apartment window, their fiery colors a stark contrast to the gray heaviness that hung within those walls. Samantha stood frozen in the center of the small living room, the social worker's words echoing in her ears like distant thunder that wouldn't fade. "We've located his father's cousin in Oregon," Ms. Wilkins explained, her professional tone unable to completely mask her discomfort. "Blood relation takes precedence in these cases. I know this is difficult, but legally, our hands are tied." Behind her, Jake sat motionless on the edge of the sofa that had been his bed for nearly 5 months now. His face, once hollow and guarded, had grown fuller, softer in their care. But now that familiar mask had returned, the careful blankness that hid the storm raging beneath. Only his white-knuckled grip on his backpack betrayed any emotion at all. "But he doesn't know these people," Samantha protested, her voice catching. "They never looked for him. They never cared enough to find him when he needed them most." Ms. Wilkins shuffled the papers in her folder, unable to meet Samantha's eyes. Mrs. Delaney, his father's cousin, wasn't aware of Jake's situation. The family had lost touch years ago. She hesitated, then added gently, "She has a stable home, financial security, a spare bedroom, all the things that, the unspoken words, hung in the air, all the things that you can't provide." From Lily's bedroom came the sound of muffled sobbing. The 7-year-old had barricaded herself inside when the social worker arrived, innately understanding the purpose of this unexpected visit. Now her grief filtered through the thin walls, each sob like a physical blow to Samantha's heart. "Can't we appeal this?" Samantha pleaded, desperation edging her voice. "He's thriving here. His grades have improved. He's in the science competition finals. His teacher says he has extraordinary potential. The hearing date is months away," Ms. Wilkins replied softly. "And frankly, without legal representation beyond the public defender, and given your current financial circumstances..." She let the sentence trail off, the reality clear enough without further elaboration. Jake stood suddenly, his movement startling in its decisiveness. "I should pack my things," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Jake," Samantha began, reaching toward him. "It's okay," he interrupted, though nothing about his rigid posture suggested anything remotely okay. "I knew this would happen eventually. Good things always end." The simplicity of his statement, the weathered wisdom no child should possess, broke something inside Samantha. Tears she'd been fighting spilled freely now as she closed the distance between them, pulling him into an embrace he initially resisted before melting into it, his thin shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "This isn't right," she whispered into his hair. "This isn't fair." "Life isn't fair," he whispered back, the words of an adult from the mouth of a child. "You taught me that good people make it better anyway." The bedroom door creaked open, revealing Lily's tear-stained face. She launched herself across the room, colliding with Jake with such force that he stumbled backward, her small arms wrapped around his waist, her face buried against his chest. "You can't go," she commanded through hiccuping sobs. "You're my brother now. You promised to help me build the supervolcano for Science Day." Jake gently disentangled himself, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Someone else will have to help with the volcano. But I left instructions in your notebook, really detailed ones. Even better than we planned." Ms. Wilkins checked her watch discreetly. "We should get going. Mrs. Delaney is expecting us by evening." The next moments passed in a blur of heartbreak. Jake's few possessions gathered into his backpack. The science project notes carefully transferred to Lily's keeping, final hugs that no one wanted to end. Through it all, Samantha felt as though she were watching from a distance, unable to believe this family they'd created could be torn apart by paperwork and regulations that recognized legal connections, but not the deeper bonds of love and belonging. Titoon. The doorway. Jake turned back one last time. The afternoon sunlight caught his face, illuminating eyes that held wisdom far beyond his years. "Remember when you found me in the rain?" he asked Samantha. "You said sometimes we have to believe things. We'll get better even when we can't see how." She nodded, unable to speak through the tightness in her throat. "I still believe that," he said with quiet certainty, "and I promise I'll come back. When I'm older, when they can't make me go where I don't want to go, I'll find you both again." Lily pressed something into his hand, her most treasured seashell, the one that sounded like the ocean. "So you don't forget us," she whispered. "I could never forget you," Jake replied, his voice breaking at last. "You're my family, the real kind, the kind that chooses each other." As Ms. Wilkins led him away down the apartment hallway, Jake turned one last time, walking backward to keep them in view until the very last moment. "I promise," he called out, his voice echoing in the narrow corridor. "No matter how long it takes, I promise I'll come back home." Then he was gone, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to have substance, an invisible weight pressing against Samantha's chest as she held Lily close, the two of them standing in the doorway long after Jake had disappeared from sight. Outside, the autumn leaves continued their dance, indifferent to the hearts breaking beneath them, hearts that would carry the shape of a missing piece until that promise could be fulfilled. Time passes with relentless indifference, transforming seasons and hearts alike. 11 years had carved new lines around Samantha Carter's eyes, streaked silver through her once auburn hair, and settled into her bones on cold mornings when the diner's heat struggled against winter's grip. Time had also emptied her small apartment of Lily's laughter, now replaced by occasional phone calls from a dormitory 3 states away, where her daughter pursued dreams that once seemed impossibly distant. "Mum, did you get the care package I sent?" Lily's voice crackled through the phone's speaker as Samantha unlocked her apartment door, juggling grocery bags and the day's mail. "Not yet, sweetheart," Samantha replied, dropping her keys into the ceramic dish Jake had made in art class all those years ago. The small, misshapen bowl remained in its place of honor, a tangible reminder of the boy whose absence they had learned to live with but never truly accepted. "But you know how mail is in this building," the conversation continued. Lily's excitement about her biochemistry research, complaints about her roommate's questionable hygiene habits, gentle probing about Samantha's health and ours at the diner. Through it all, Samantha sorted through bills and flyers, the mundane paperwork of an ordinary life, until she saw it. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, with her name and address printed in elegant script. No return address, just a small, embossed logo she didn't recognize. A stylized tree with roots forming intricate patterns beneath. Her fingers hesitated over it, something about its unexpected formality triggering an inexplicable flutter of anticipation. And Professor Henderson says if the results are consistent, we might even get published in... Mom, are you still there? "Sorry." "Lily," Samantha said, sliding her finger beneath the envelope's seal, just distracted by something in the mail. Inside was a single card, the same cream color, bearing an invitation to the Hartwell Foundation Annual Awards for Innovation in Sustainable Technologies. At the bottom, a handwritten note in precise script. "Your presence is specifically requested by Dr. Jacob Evans, recipient of this year's Pioneer Award. Transportation and accommodations provided." The card slipped from Samantha's suddenly numb fingers. "Mom, what's wrong? You sound weird." "Jacob Evans," Samantha whispered, her voice barely audible. "Lily, I think it's Jake." The silence that followed stretched across the miles, separating mother and daughter, filled with 11 years of wondering, of occasional internet searches that led nowhere, of birthdays marked quietly with Jake's favorite chocolate cake even. In his absence. "Are you sure?" Lily finally asked, her voice tight with controlled hope. "I mean, Jake is a common name." "He always said he'd come back," Samantha replied, bending to retrieve the fallen invitation. "Remember? The day they took him, he promised." Later that night, after Lily had hung up with promises to fly home immediately, My professor owes me a favor, and this is way more important than midterms. Samantha sat at her kitchen table, the invitation propped against the salt shaker. The modest apartment, the same one they had shared with Jake all those years ago, seemed filled with ghosts of memory. Jake helping Lily with homework at this very table. Jake's makeshift bed on the sofa, the shelf he'd built for Lily's growing seashell collection, still holding its treasures, though Lily had long outgrown such things. Samantha's fingers traced the embossed tree logo, remembering a science project about sustainable ecosystems that Jake had worked on with such passion. The memory of his voice, explaining photosynthesis to Lily with patient enthusiasm, echoed in her mind. The child's voice now impossible to reconcile with Dr. Jacob Evans, a name that conjured images of laboratories and innovations beyond. Her understanding. A quick internet search confirmed what her heart already knew. Dr. Jacob Evans, 31 according to his biography, the math aligned perfectly, founder of Eden Technologies, pioneering revolutionary approaches to urban agriculture and sustainable energy systems. His company photograph showed a tall man with serious eyes that Samantha would have recognized anywhere, despite the professional suit and confident stance that had replaced the thin, wary boy she'd found huddled outside a diner in the rain. The accompanying article highlighted his remarkable journey: scholarships to prestigious universities, multiple patents before age 25, a fortune built on innovations that were transforming how cities feed their populations. Nothing about foster homes or distant relatives in Oregon. Nothing about a struggling single mother who had once sold her father's watch to keep him. Samantha closed the laptop, unexpectedly afraid. What place could she possibly have in the life of this brilliant, successful man? What had seemed miraculous moments ago now felt intimidating. Perhaps the invitation was merely courtesy, an acknowledgement of a brief chapter in his complicated past, not the reunion her heart had instantly imagined. The kettle whistled, startling her from these thoughts. As she prepared her tea, the same inexpensive brand she'd been buying for decades, Samantha noticed something she'd missed in her initial shock. Tucked inside the invitation envelope was a small, weathered object. Lily's seashell, the one she had pressed into Jake's hand that last day, insisting it would help him remember them. He had kept it all these years. Samantha held the shell to her ear, just as they had done together so long ago, and closed her eyes. Beyond the shell's hollow echo, she could almost hear Jake's childhood voice making that solemn promise. "I'll come back, no matter how long it takes." Outside her window, the city lights blurred through unexpected tears as Samantha whispered to the empty apartment, "And I never stopped waiting, my boy, not for a single day." The grand ballroom of the Hartwell Foundation shimmered with elegance, chandeliers casting golden light across a sea of designer gowns and perfectly tailored suits. Samantha Carter stood at the entrance, her simple black dress, purchased second-hand and carefully altered, suddenly feeling woefully inadequate among such opulence. Beside her, Lily squeezed her hand, excitement and nervousness radiating from her in equal measure. "Mum, look at this place," Lily whispered, her eyes wide as they took in the magnificent space. "It's like we stepped into another world." Indeed, it was a world away from their reality, from the diner's grease-spattered counters and the modest apartment they'd called home for so many years. A world where brilliant minds gathered to celebrate innovations that would shape humanity's future. A realm of influence and achievement that Samantha had never imagined entering. An attendant approached with practiced grace, checking their names against the guest list. Ms. Carter and Ms. Carter, Dr. Evans has arranged special seating for you. Please follow me. They were led to a table directly before the stage, marked with an elegant, reserved card. As they settled into their seats, Samantha's heart pounded so forcefully she feared others might hear it. Conversations flowed around them, discussions of research grants and breakthrough technologies, while she sat in silence, eyes constantly scanning the crowd for a face she hadn't seen in 11 years, yet had never stopped seeking in crowds. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the sound system, "please take your seats. The award ceremony will begin momentarily." The lights dimmed slightly as a distinguished man took the stage, welcoming guests and explaining the Foundation's mission to support transformative technologies. Samantha barely registered his words, her attention fixed on the group of people seated to the side of the stage. Among them, surely, the man who had once been her boy. "And now, it is my great honor to present this year's Pioneer Award for Innovation in Sustainable Technologies to a truly remarkable individual," the speaker continued. "His work on urban agricultural systems has revolutionized how cities approach food security, while his medical technology initiatives have brought affordable healthcare solutions to communities most in need. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Jacob Evans." The applause thundered through the ballroom as a tall figure rose from the side seating and approached the podium. Samantha's breath caught in her throat. There, standing in the spotlight, was Jake, yet not the Jake she had known. This man moved with quiet confidence, his shoulders straight, his gaze steady as he surveyed the audience. Grown now, transformed by years and experience, yet something in his eyes, a certain intensity, a thoughtfulness, remained unchanged from the boy who had once repaired her kitchen faucet with meticulous care. "Thank you for this honor," he began, his voice deeper than in her memories, but carrying that same careful consideration with which he had always chosen his words. "The work we're doing at Eden Technologies aims to solve problems I witnessed firsthand growing up. Food insecurity, prohibitive healthcare costs, environmental degradation in communities with the fewest resources to address them." As he outlined his company's achievements, sustainable vertical farming systems deployed in urban food deserts, portable diagnostic technology making healthcare accessible in remote areas, Samantha felt tears gathering. This brilliant man, this force for good in the world, had once been the hungry boy she'd found shivering in the rain. But tonight, Jake continued, his voice softening slightly, "I want to speak about something more personal, about how innovation often stems not from privilege and abundance, but from witnessing struggle and imagining better possibilities." The ballroom fell silent as he paused, his gaze finding Samantha's across the distance between them. For a moment, the years seemed to dissolve, and she could see the 10-year-old boy looking back at her, asking without words if she might be different from all the others who had disappointed him. "When I was 10 years old," Jake said, his voice steady though emotion flickered across his face, "I found myself homeless, forgotten by a system designed to protect children like me. On a stormy night when I'd lost all hope, A woman found me. She was struggling herself, a single mother working multiple jobs, barely making ends meet. By any practical measure, she couldn't afford to help anyone else. Lily's hand found Samantha's, gripping tightly as tears streamed down both their faces. But Samantha Carter didn't make decisions based on practical measures, Jake continued, his gaze never leaving hers. She made them based on compassion, on recognizing humanity in others, even when the world had rendered them invisible. For 5 precious months, she showed me what family truly means, not defined by blood or legal documents, but by choice, by sacrifice, by love given freely without guarantee of return. A murmur rippled through the audience as heads turned, seeking the woman he described. Every innovation I've developed, every problem I've sought to solve, began in that small apartment where a woman with nothing to spare somehow made room for a lost child. Jake's voice wavered for the first time. She taught me that true abundance isn't measured in resources, but in the capacity to care beyond what seems reasonable or possible. He gestured toward their table, and suddenly a spotlight illuminated Samantha and Lily. "Would you stand, please, both of you?" On legs that felt suddenly unsteady, Samantha rose, Lily beside her. The ballroom erupted in applause, but Samantha heard nothing beyond the blood rushing in her ears as Jake's eyes, the eyes of the boy she had loved and lost and found again, held hers across the distance. "Everything I have accomplished," Jake said, his voice carrying above the applause, "everything I will achieve in years to come began with one simple truth. Samantha Carter believed in me when no one else did. And for that gift, the most valuable any child can receive, I dedicate this award and all my work to her." As the applause swelled again, Jake stepped down from the podium, moving with purpose through the crowd. And then he was there, standing. Before them, no longer the celebrated scientist, but simply their Jake, returned at last from the rain. The opulent ballroom had emptied, leaving behind only the echoes of applause and the lingering scent of expensive perfume. In a quiet corner, beneath the soft glow of a single chandelier, 3 figures stood locked in an embrace that bridged 11 years of separation. Time seemed suspended in this moment of reunion. Jake's arms wrapped around both Samantha and Lily, holding them close, as if afraid they might disappear if he loosened his grip. When they finally drew apart, Jake's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he studied Samantha's face. The years had etched new lines around her eyes, threaded silver through her hair, but the warmth in her gaze remained unchanged. That same unconditional acceptance that had once saved a lost boy from despair. "I have imagined this moment so many times," Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. "There were days when the memory of you both was all that kept me going." Lily wiped tears from her cheeks, her smile radiant. "We never stopped looking for you. Mom would search your name online every few months, hoping for some clue. The Delaney's moved so often," Jake explained, guiding them to a cluster of plush chairs. "By the time I was 16, we'd lived in 5 different states. It made it nearly impossible to find my way back to you." "What happened after they took you?" Samantha asked softly, the question she'd held in her heart for 11 years. Jake's expression grew distant. "The Delaneys weren't unkind, just detached. They provided shelter, food, basic necessities, but never the sense of belonging I'd found with you. His gaze returned to Samantha, intense with meaning. I kept my head down, focused on school. It was the one thing I could control. A science teacher recognized my potential, helped me secure a scholarship to a university program for gifted students. From there, well, you heard the rest tonight. We're so proud of you, Samantha whispered, reaching out to squeeze his hand. Everything you've accomplished, the lives you're changing with your work, it's extraordinary, Jake. He shook his head, a flash of the stubborn boy still visible in the accomplished man. Everything I've become began with you, Samantha. You saw possibility in me when everyone else saw a burden. You taught me what it means to give without expectation of return. Jake leaned forward, his expression intense. And now, after all these years, I can finally return a fraction of what you gave me. Rising from his chair, Jake retrieved an elegant leather portfolio from a nearby table. I have something for you both. Samantha accepted the portfolio with puzzled eyes, opening it to find documents embossed with the same tree logo as the invitation. As she scanned the pages, her confusion gave way to disbelief, then shock. Jake, this can't be a house, he confirmed quietly. 3 bedrooms, a garden in the back, near the university where Lily studies, and a trust fund to ensure you never have to work double shifts again. Lily gasped, looking between Jake and her mother with wide eyes. Samantha's hands trembled as she closed the portfolio, shaking her head. Jake, I can't accept this. It's too much. We're fine, really. I've managed all these years. Survived, Jake corrected gently. You've survived, Samantha, but at what cost? I've seen your hands, still rough from washing dishes and stocking shelves. I notice how you calculate every expense, how you wear clothes mended multiple times. His voice softened further. And I remember everything you sacrificed for me. He knelt before her chair, taking her weathered hands in his. Do you remember the watch, your father's pocket watch? Samantha's breath caught. How did you? Lily told me, in one of our emails since we reconnected. How you sold it to pay the legal fees when you were fighting to keep me. Jake's voice caught. The one thing of value you possessed, given away for a boy who wasn't even yours by blood or law. You were mine in every way that mattered, Samantha whispered fiercely. And you were the mother I needed when the world had taken everything else. Jake replied, equally fierce, please let me do this, not out of obligation, but because giving to those we love is the greatest privilege we can know. You taught me that, Samantha, with every meal you shared when you hadn't eaten yourself, with every extra shift you took, with every sacrifice you made without hesitation or regret. From his pocket, Jake withdrew a small velvet pouch, placing it gently in Samantha's palm. This was the first thing I searched for when I had the resources. With trembling fingers, Samantha opened the pouch. Inside lay her father's pocket watch, its golden case gleaming softly in the chandelier light. How did you find it? She breathed, cradling the precious object. The pawn shop owner remembered you, said he'd never forgotten the woman who sold her father's watch for a boy who wasn't hers. Jake smiled softly. Some stories stay with people, even in a world where everything seems disposable. Lily moved to her mother's side, arm slipping around her shoulders. Mom, you've given everything for others your whole life. Maybe it's time to let someone give back to you. Samantha looked between the two young faces before her daughter, born of her body, her son, claimed by her heart, and felt something long tense within her begin to unfurl. The weight of years spent stretching meager resources, of sacrificing her own needs for others, of constant worry and calculation, gradually lifting from her shoulders. "My two brilliant children," she whispered, drawing them both close again. "How did I get so blessed?" Jake's smile held all the warmth and certainty of a man who had found his way home after years of searching. "You blessed yourself, Samantha, with every choice to love beyond reason, to give beyond capacity. Now it's our turn." Outside the grand building, stars scattered across the velvet sky like promises kept after long waiting. 3 figures emerged, arms linked, faces illuminated not just by streetlights, but by the radiance that comes when broken circles are finally completed, when the kindness once given to a rain-soaked child returns, multiplied beyond imagination. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows of a modest yet beautiful home, painting golden patterns across the hardwood floors. Samantha stood in the center of the living room, still struggling to believe this space belonged to her. After decades of cramped apartments with temperamental heating and paper-thin walls, the solidity of this house felt almost dreamlike, a sanctuary built of light and space and permanence. 3 weeks had passed since the award ceremony, 3 weeks of profound adjustment. Samantha had given notice at both jobs, packed their few belongings, and stepped hesitantly into a future she'd never dared imagine. Each morning, she awoke expecting to find herself back in the old apartment, the weight of financial worry pressing against her chest. Each morning, the gentle bird song from the garden and the absence of that familiar burden reminded her that everything had changed. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway drew her to the window. Jake emerged from a sensible electric vehicle, nothing like the luxury cars his success might afford. Even in his wealth, he maintained the practicality she'd instilled in him all those years ago. Behind him, Lily bounced excitedly from the passenger seat, her arms laden with grocery bags. Watching them together, her children, one born of her body, one claimed by her heart, filled Samantha with a completeness that defied description. Jake had been back in their lives for less than a month, yet it felt as if the 11-year separation had somehow dissolved. The bonds between them not weakened, but strengthened by time and distance. "Mom!" Lily called, bursting through the front door with characteristic exuberance. "We got everything for dinner. Jake insisted on making your famous meatloaf. Well, attempting it anyway." Jake followed more sedately, his smile warm as he set additional bags on the counter. "I've been dreaming about that meatloaf for years. Nothing I ate in the finest restaurants ever came close." "It's hardly gourmet," Samantha laughed, already sorting through the ingredients with practiced hands. "Just ground beef and breadcrumbs. Really? It wasn't the ingredients," Jake said softly, his expression suddenly serious. "It was knowing someone cared enough to make something special, even when there was barely enough to go around." The afternoon unfolded in comfortable domesticity, Jake and Lily chopping vegetables side by side, recounting stories from their respective university experiences, while Samantha prepared the meatloaf. Memories of similar evenings from years ago overlapped with this present moment, creating a tapestry of then and now, loss and recovery, separation and reunion. "I have something to show you both," Jake announced as they worked, pulling a tablet from his bag. "I've been developing this since the night of the ceremony, and the paperwork was finalized this morning." On the screen appeared a website, elegant in its simplicity, featuring the now familiar tree logo, but with additional branches and roots, forming a complex, interconnected system. Across the top, the words, "The Rainlight Foundation," gleamed in gentle blue letters. "Rainlight?" Samantha questioned, looking up at Jake with curious eyes. "For the night you found me in the rain," he explained, his voice soft with reverence for that pivotal moment. "And for how you brought light into my life when everything was darkness." As Jake scrolled through the site, explaining the Foundation's mission, Samantha's eyes filled with tears. Housing assistance for single parents, educational support for children in transitional situations, medical care funding, legal aid for families navigating the foster system. Each program addressed a specific struggle she had faced while trying to keep Jake. Each solution crafted with intimate understanding of the barriers that separated families not by choice, but by circumstance. The Foundation will work directly with social services to identify families in situations like ours, Jake continued, his passion evident in every word. Instead of separating children from adults who love them simply because of financial constraints, we'll provide the support needed to keep them together. "Jake," Samantha whispered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had created. "This will change so many lives, just as you changed mine," he replied simply, "and there's more." He navigated to another page where Samantha's own face looked back at her. "The Foundation needs a director, someone with first-hand experience, incomparable compassion, and unmatched determination." Samantha stared at the screen in disbelief. "Me? But I don't have any experience running a foundation. I've spent my life waiting tables and stocking shelves." "You've spent your life seeing the humanity in others when the world had rendered them invisible," Jake corrected gently, echoing the words from his speech. "You've navigated impossible systems with no resources. You've stretched nothing into something more times than anyone should ever have to." "There's no one more qualified." Lily squeezed her mother's hand. "He's right, Mom. All those years watching you fight for everyone around you, there's no better teacher for this work." As the reality of Jake's offer settled around her, Samantha felt something shift within her soul. The final transformation from a woman who had spent decades merely surviving to one who might help others truly thrive. This wasn't charity being offered, it was purpose, a chance to transform her hard-earned wisdom into hope for others walking similar paths. "Yes," she said simply, certainty blooming within her. "Yes, I'll do it." Hours later, as evening softened the edges of the day, they gathered around the dining table, the meatloaf steaming in the center, surrounded by dishes that honored both past and present. Jake raised his glass, his eyes moving between the two, women who had shaped his heart. "To family," he offered, his voice rich with emotion, "not defined by blood or documents, but by choice, by love given freely without guarantee of return." "To coming home," Lily added, her smile radiant. "No matter how long the journey takes." Samantha looked at the faces before her, at the miracle of this moment that no hardship or separation had prevented, and raised her own glass. "To full circles," she whispered, "and to the rain that brings new life." Outside, a gentle shower began to fall, droplets catching the golden light from within as they streamed down the windows. Inside, a family, fractured once by circumstance but never broken in spirit, continued the story that had begun on a stormy night long ago, when a single act of compassion set in motion ripples that would eventually return, multiplied beyond measure. The gentle autumn breeze carried the scent of cinnamon and apples through the open windows of the backyard gazebo. Samantha Carter sat with her eyes closed, savoring the harmony of birdsong and distant laughter, simple pleasures that had once seemed unattainable luxuries in a life consumed by survival. 2 years had passed since that transformative night at the awards ceremony. 2 years of profound change that had reshaped not only her circumstances, but her understanding of life's possibilities. From her vantage point, she could see the sprawling garden where Jake knelt beside a young boy, patiently explaining the science behind the vegetable seedlings they were planting together. The boy, one of many children who visited the Reunite Foundation's weekend mentorship program, listened with rapt attention, his earlier shyness replaced by eager curiosity. "He has your gift," Lily observed, settling beside Samantha with 2 steaming mugs of tea. "The way he connects with those kids, it's exactly how you were with him." Samantha accepted the tea gratefully, her hands no longer roughened by constant work, but still bearing the memory of those years in their subtle scars and lines. Jake always understood what it meant to be seen when the world is determined to look past you. "That's why your foundation has helped so many families," Lily said, pride evident in her voice. "The system sees problems and paperwork. You and Jake see people." The foundation had indeed flourished beyond their most optimistic projections. In just 2 years, they had established programs in 5 states, helping hundreds of families remain intact despite financial hardships. Each success story represented children who, like Jake once had, found stability with adults who loved them, despite lacking traditional resources. "How are your classes going?" Samantha asked, watching her daughter's expression brighten. "Challenging, but in the best way," Lily replied. Her decision to switch from biochemistry to social work had surprised many of her professors, but had seemed inevitable to those who knew her story. "My field placement starts next week. I'll be working with the family reunification program downtown." Samantha's heart swelled with quiet pride. Her daughter, who had once shared their meager home with a homeless boy without question, had grown into a young woman determined to create systems that honored the complex tapestry of human connection. "Your perspective will be invaluable to those families." "I had the best teacher," Lily said simply, resting her head briefly against her mother's shoulder, a gesture unchanged since childhood. Across the lawn, Jake was now helping several children create a small compost system, his animated explanations punctuated by delighted laughter. The brilliant scientist who addressed world leaders and corporate executives with polished confidence still seemed most at home here, sleeves rolled up, hands in the dirt, sharing knowledge with children who reminded him of himself. How far they had all traveled from that rain-soaked night when a desperate single mother had extended her umbrella to a forgotten child. The struggles that had once defined Samantha's existence, The constant calculations of how to stretch insufficient resources, the bone-deep exhaustion of multiple jobs, the gnawing fear of unexpected expenses, had gradually released their grip, allowing space for joy, rest, and possibility. The Rainlight Foundation offices now occupied the building where Samantha had once waited tables at Rosie's Diner. The establishment had closed when its owner retired, and Jake had purchased the property, transforming it while preserving elements of its humble charm. Samantha's office, where families found understanding instead of judgment, solutions instead of barriers, featured a small plaque that read simply, "Where kindness begins." "Mom, Jake, come see what Mateo made," Lily called suddenly, waving toward a shy 7-year-old who clutched something in his small hands. As they gathered around, the boy cautiously opened his palms to reveal an intricately folded paper crane. "Jake showed me how," he explained, voice barely above a whisper. He said his sister taught him, and it helped him remember that beautiful things can come from simple stuff. Jake's eyes met Samantha's over the child's head, shared memory passing between them of newspaper cranes folded at their kitchen table, of resourcefulness born from necessity, of beauty created despite scarcity. "You know what else Jake taught me?" Mateo continued, gaining confidence. "That family isn't just the people you're born with, it's the people who choose you too." Something caught in Samantha's throat as Jake knelt to the child's level. "That's absolutely right," he affirmed, gently. "And the wonderful thing about chosen family is that it can grow in all sorts of unexpected directions." As the afternoon mellowed toward evening, they gathered around the large farmhouse table in the garden, not just the three of them, but the children from the mentorship program, several foundation staff members, and neighbors who had become friends. The simple meal shared among them echoed countless dinners from years past, when three people had fashioned a family from nothing but willingness and love. Laughter flowed freely. Stories passed around the table like cherished heirlooms, and Samantha found herself momentarily overwhelmed by the abundance surrounding her. Not merely material comfort, but the rich tapestry of connection that had grown from a single act of compassion on a stormy night. Jake rose to refill water glasses, pausing behind Samantha's chair to rest his hand lightly on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly, the question containing all the years between them. Samantha covered his hand with her own, watching Lily across the table as she helped a small girl cut her food, the gesture unconscious and natural. "Beyond words," she replied, truthfully. As twilight gathered around their extended family, Samantha Carter, no longer defined by struggle, but by the love she had given and received, understood that the greatest wealth had never been found in bank accounts or possessions. It lived in moments like this, when kindness offered without expectation returned multiplied beyond measure, when broken circles became complete again, when the rain that had once symbolized hardship now nourished gardens of possibility, in the gentle laughter surrounding her, in the bonds that transcended blood and circumstance, in the lives transformed by simple human recognition. Samantha found the answer to a question she'd once asked in her darkest hour. Yes, a single moment of compassion could indeed transform everything.